Frankenstein and Responsibility, a Frankenstein Project by Kylie Morgan. A major theme of responsibility, or the lack thereof, is present in Frankenstein and many Frankenstein iterations. I will be focusing on the topic of responsibility and the consequences that follow in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the very first Frankenstein film, the 1910 Edison Studios' Frankenstein. Overall, I have noticed that irresponsible actions lead to dire consequences. Mary Shelley was born in London in 1797 to political philosopher and writer William Godwin and feminist writer Mary Wollstonecraft. Unfortunately, her mother died 11 days after giving birth to Mary due to childbirth complications. Mary Shelley was later married to poet Percy Shelley. Mary faced many fertility issues and eventually the loss of all of her children besides one. Mary Shelley was best known for her novel Frankenstein, which is considered to be one of the very first science fiction novels. With the death of her children, husband, sister, mother, and father, Mary Shelley lived a hard life and eventually passed in 1851. This novel starts with a series of letters being exchanged between Captain Robert Walton and his sister. When the dangerous mission Walton is on is halted by icy water, he notices an ill-looking man riding across the ice. This man is Victor Frankenstein. Once Victor is aboard the ship, he shares with Walton his life story and why he is there. Victor starts by telling Walton about his life in his home village and about his family. He then continues telling Walton how, while at university, he becomes obsessed with discovering the secret of life, and he succeeded. He created a living thing made from pieces of dead bodies. Victor instantly regretted his actions and shunned his new creature. Victor is then soon informed that his young brother has been murdered, and Victor firmly believes that his creation was to blame, and he ends up being right. The creation soon explains himself and asks for Victor to create a partner for him. Victor refuses this, and further angers his creation, resulting in the murder of his best friend and wife, and the soon death of his father due to the great amount of grief that he dealt with. After the deaths of his loved ones, Victor swears to track down and get revenge on his creation for what he had done to his life. This is where he meets Walton on the ice. Victor, being very ill, dies on the boat soon after, and Walton meets Victor's creation. This creature tells Walton his side of the story and decides it is now his time to die as well. I found it interesting that originally in the novel, Victor Frankenstein was planning on marrying his cousin Elizabeth, because at the time it wasn't taboo for cousins to get married. Although due to changing times, this was later changed so Victor would marry his adopted sister, not his cousin. Adopted sister, meaning that Victor and Elizabeth were no longer seen as being blood related. Science, in general, was also taking great strides at this time. It is said that Mary Shelley most likely came up with the idea of Frankenstein's creation from listening to her husband and his friends about the possibility of bringing the dead back to life. Many people believed this to be possible at the time. Shelley also lived in a time where religion was highly valued, so the recurring theme of religion versus science in Frankenstein is quite interesting and still has much value today. Victor had the responsibility to teach and love his creation as if it were his child. The creation only turned sour and murderous because he was rejected, beaten, and unloved. I think if Victor had treated his creation better, things could have turned out better for the both of them. Although I don't believe that Victor had the right intentions when creating his monster. He desired to conquer death, not to raise a creature he had to care for, nurture, and teach. I believe Victor was more intrigued by his idea rather than the actual creature, and this tragedy resulted in the death of Victor, his creation, and everyone he loved. Jim Sharman is a 74-year-old Australian director and writer. He is best known for directing the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is considered a cult classic. This musical is centered around a young couple named Brad and Janet. Brad and Janet get a flat tire and are forced to look for help in a huge haunted house-looking mansion. At the mansion, they meet Dr. Frankenfurter, who is a transvestite scientist, and other odd-looking characters, including Dr. Frankenfurter's newest experimental creation named Rocky. The Rocky Horror Picture Show came out in 1975 and is based on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. At this time, LGBTQ+ relationships were very much looked down upon. Although within 1975, the governor of Pennsylvania issued the first state executive order banning sexual orientation employment discrimination by the government. Some U.S. states decriminalized private consensual adult homosexual acts, and Colorado started issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Some characters in this film also encouraged premarital sex. While one of the major themes in the Rocky Horror Picture Show is sexuality, we are still able to see the theme of responsibility as we do in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. For starters, Brad at the very beginning of the film had the responsibility of getting the car's spare tire fixed in case they ever needed it, which they did. Because Janet and Brad didn't have a spare tire, it led them to Dr. Frankenfurter's mansion, which changed their lives forever. Eddie, a character that Dr. Frankenfurter had imprisoned, was also irresponsible while escaping, and it led to him being cooked and ate for dinner. Dr. Frankenfurter was also irresponsible for killing Eddie in the first place, because in killing Eddie, Dr. Frankenfurter was killed for punishment of doing so. Rocky was also irresponsible for sleeping with Janet, as this pushed Dr. Frankenfurter closer to insanity. Every character's action led to some sort of consequence. J. Searle Dawley was born in 1877. He was an American producer, director, and screenwriter. He directed over 145 silent films. Dawley was best known for directing the very first Frankenstein film, and he thought of himself as being the first motion picture director. The film begins with Victor Frankenstein leaving for college and discovering the mystery of life. Frankenstein, after seeing his creation come to life, faints from how ugly and monstrous his creation is. He then returns to his home village to get away from school and to visit his family and soon-to-be wife. Frankenstein's creation grows jealous of Frankenstein's soon-to-be wife, but sees himself in a mirror and runs away, leaving Frankenstein with a happily ever after. This was the very first Frankenstein film made. It was also considered one of the very first horror films by Edison Studios. This was a silent film because films didn't have sound until around the year 1927. This film had similar responsibilities and consequences as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I noticed that this film started off by following Shelley's Frankenstein pretty closely, but it quickly became more family-friendly as it went on. The film is similar to the novel in the way that Victor should have taken responsibility for his creation from the start. In the film, Victor shuns his creation, which causes it to run away and then stalk him. Had Victor taken responsibility for the creature, his life would have been a lot easier, although this version did have a more positive ending than the novel. In conclusion, responsibility is a giant theme in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and other Frankenstein iterations. Responsibilities and the consequences that come with not doing what you're supposed to do, or what you know is right, comes in many forms but usually have the same message. Take responsibility for yourself and your actions, or you will face a series of unpleasant consequences.